everyone, to the 8th episode of the Electric Wire podcast. I'm Kristen Jilks, your host. I'm the Executive Director of the Customers First Coalition, and we're bringing you this podcast monthly now to discuss Wisconsin energy and utility issues. Today, we've got a really interesting discussion lined up for you on some of the top energy stories and projects of 2020. But before we get to that, our listeners care so deeply about energy issues and know the value of energy in keeping our households and businesses running. And I wanted to encourage you all to join me in making a donation to the Keep Wisconsin Warm Fund this winter. If you work for a company that offers a donation match, make sure you seek that out too, and make sure you ask everyone you know if they're able to offer some help to these families who need help covering their energy bills during this very difficult time. You can learn more about the Keep Wisconsin Warm Fund and donate or volunteer at kwwf.org. We're also going to put a link to that in the show notes, and thanks to everyone who can help out on that. And thanks to you all for joining us for a very successful first year of the Electric Wire. I have really enjoyed connecting with many of our industry colleagues this way in 2020. And if you have ideas for future podcasts, please get in touch. Thanks also to the members of the Customers First Coalition for your continued support. And with that, I'm going to turn us over to the 2020 Wisconsin Energy Year in Review Roundtable. Welcome, everyone. I'm joined today by Carrie Templeton, Chief of Staff to PSC Chairperson Rebecca Bach. Carrie's been at the Public Service Commission for 10 years in January. Congratulations, Carrie.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks for having me on.
We're excited to have you. And also joined by Chris Hubbuch, a reporter for the Wisconsin State Journal, who covers, among other things, energy issues.
Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here. Heather
Allen, Executive Director of Renew Wisconsin, a familiar voice to some of you as the host of the Wisconsin Energy Broadcast podcast. This is Heather's second time joining our podcast. She was here for our very first episode too, The Rise of Solar. Thanks, Heather.
Great to be back.
And last but not least, we have Matt Spencer, Director of Government Affairs for Madison Gas and Electric. Matt's been a frequent guest here, mainly just because you're a fellow podcast aficionado, right, Spence?
Love podcasts. Love to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks, Spence. All right, let's jump right in with our first topic. And this is the top Wisconsin energy stories of the year. Chris, I'm going to start off with you because you've written probably most of the top Wisconsin energy stories this year. What have you got?
Man, this is so hard because there's so many good stories, good energy stories, but I think in the end, you got to go with COVID, which is probably the number one story for whatever podcast you might be hosting. But it just sort of dominated everything for the year, and surprisingly, not that many direct effects. I mean, it turns out that utilities are actually pretty well set up to deal with stuff like this. But the economic impacts, I think, are the story that I don't think anyone back in March thought that we would be here in December, with moratoriums still in place on utility shutoffs and with millions of dollars in accumulating unpaid bills that is I think going to continue to be a story next year. So that's my pick.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody else want to chime in?
In Madison Gas and Electric service territory, we have a lot of, foot traffic businesses, hospitality businesses. So, with businesses being forced to close their doors, small businesses are being affected more so than ever before. We recently sent a letter to our congressional delegation asking for some sort of, utility bill forgiveness, extra money for IHEAP, just because it's customers that have never faced this issue before. I mean, obviously there's going to be situations where low income, challenging situations that customers face, but this is a whole new animal. Customers that have never faced issues paying their bills before, it's a problem this year.
Thanks, Matt. I'll just note that Customers First just sent a letter to Congress today as well, encouraging bipartisan support for relief funding for utility bills, utility arrears. There are more in-need households than ever before. And when utility providers are not making disconnections, but they are still funding the operations, it's really important that we make sure they have the resources they need to keep going too. So that's something I think we're all really hoping to see come out of this next COVID relief bill.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would agree with COVID. Also, the Wisconsin Commission was one of the first in the country to take action to protect consumers, to suspend disconnections, but also take action to make sure utilities remain financially strong. And so we were able to do that during the crisis. And as Chris pointed out, the disconnection moratorium continues till spring, to ensure people had water for hand washing and electricity while they're staying at home and doing school at home. But there's an impact to that. And that's what we're going to be looking at in 2021 with stakeholders and utilities. And the utilities are going to be filing plans with the commission in January on how they plan to deal with some of those arrearage balances. So the challenges are still ahead, but there's hope in sight with the vaccines coming. So that's good.
Absolutely. Thanks, Carrie.
So from a renewable energy perspective, a lot of folks have been stuck at home looking around their houses trying to figure out, how to improve their own home and to lower their bills. And so we've had an interesting confluence of things happen that has resulted in just rapid uptake of residential solar in Wisconsin. We saw the focus on energy reservations in 2019 were around just under 700 for residential solar reservations for incentives. And this year they're anticipated to be around 2,000. So that's a dramatic increase in residential solar customers in Wisconsin. So the solar industry has actually remained a really important bright spot in our challenged economy. And I think that's some good news to come out of this very difficult year, but it has been hard on a lot of people. And we, we're hoping to see more good news stories like that going forward.
Agreed. All right, let's move on to our next topic. Heather, I'm going to start with you for this one. What are some of the top renewable energy projects from this year from your perspective?
We had some major projects get approved this year. And our first really large scale project, Two Creeks up in Manitowoc County, 150 megawatts, 800 acres. This is an MG&E and WPS project, was energized in November. That took us from we really doubled the total solar operating in the state today, with another 150 megawatts. So that was huge. And then we've had two major solar projects get approval. One in Kenosha County, that's Paris Solar, that's 200 megawatts. That was approved just this month. And then earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, Badger State Solar in Jefferson County. So they're both Southeast Wisconsin got approved. But there's been some smaller projects. That project I talked to you about on the first podcast, the Ranger Power project up in Northwest Wisconsin, 74 megawatts, that also got approved this year. So there've been a number of critical solar farm approvals all around the state at all levels of government.
Awesome. Thanks. And I was gonna note when I threw it to you, I don't want this to be a spoiler for your Energy Summit awards that you hand out in January, right?
Oh no, they're quite different than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. The spoilers, but everybody should sign up for the Renewable Energy Summit in January, right?
Yeah, January 12th through the 14th. We have some nationally recognized speakers, including the head of the Energy Storage Association. So we're talking about batteries and microgrids, and it's going to be really interesting.
I'm really excited for that. Other thoughts on the top renewable energy projects this year?
Well, as a company, we're obviously happy to see the Two Creeks solar facility go online. It's going to power about 16,000 homes, and we've also like Heather said, we have smaller projects that received approval and or under construction right now. The Dane County Airport project, which will help Dane County complete its 100% clean energy goal, then recently the O'Brien solar facility in Fitchburg, it's 20 megawatts and it's going to serve large customers in our service territory through our shared solar program. And then another smaller project, the Maury Field in Middleton. It's a solar project that's going to help serve the city of Middleton and the Cross Plains School District. So, I mean, obviously every little bit helps. The large solar facility that's up in Manitowoc County is great, but these smaller facilities that are down, near our service territory, our customers like to see them, and then our large customers like to buy into our shared solar program.
So I would just add to add a little bit of nerd factor and a stat. The commission approved over 478 megawatts of solar this year.
Wow.
So kind of to Matt's point, there were a couple of really big projects, and then there's a lot of all these other projects going on all over that add up to some really big numbers. And that's even with COVID going on. And so there's just been a lot of activity, and we're going to see even more in 2021, I think.
We're a smaller company, when you compare us to the other IOUs in the state. And since 2015, we have, I think it's 250 megawatts that we've proposed that have gotten approval for clean energy projects. So, I mean, we're moving forward with this. Like I said, our customers want to see it. So if our customers want to see it, we're going to do everything we can to reach our 2050 goal sooner rather than later.
As we're talking about utility scale renewable energy, I'm looking for a few of you to weigh in on how this all fits with the environmental justice issues we've all been talking a lot about lately.
Sure. Well, this is Heather from Renew. I would jump in. The first thing that springs to mind is there are a number of unevenly distributed environmental health impacts from fossil fuel generation of electricity. Coal-fired power plants release a lot of particulates and chemicals into the surrounding air, water, and ground that impact the health of the people who live in those regions and even further out than you would expect. So oftentimes it's definitely proven that those are communities of color, and it is they face a disproportionate burden of the impacts of fossil fuel generation. So when we're talking about clean energy generation that does not have those emissions and those particulates going into people's communities, people's homes, breathing them at school. I mean, this is an answer to a huge environmental injustice. So that's one important element, and I'll let my colleagues jump in here.
I would just echo that, and I think for sure we saw that with WEC's announcement of the plan to retirement of South Oak Creek. A plant where the community has had a lot of impacts, even just stuff like coal dust, on their homes and cars, and there was a lot of cheering of that decision, which is obviously tied to their plans to invest in wind and solar and batteries in a big way.
There's a lot of interest in community solar too, and allocating portions of that to low-income customers and other communities that typically are unable to take advantage of those. So I've seen more interest in that from utilities and stakeholders. Something the commission proposed in its budget was to set aside some intervener compensation funds for groups that focus on equity issues and are non-traditional voices in the commission process, because we all know at the commission, they rely on what's in the record to make their decisions. So if you don't have a voice in the record, you don't have a voice at the table in the decision. So that's something that we feel strongly about, and is one of the chairperson's priorities this year, is focusing on equity and diversity and including all the voices at the table.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the fastest way to clean the grid is with utility scale solar. And, Heather mentioned the two projects in Southeast Wisconsin. There's a project out in Iowa County, and then the project in Kewaunee or Manitowoc County. All those help folks that live in apartments that can't put solar panels up on their house. Our shared solar programs are wildly popular in the Madison area. And it just allows customers that want clean energy to get clean energy at a fair price. And we're happy to provide that to, the citizens of the greater Madison area.
Yeah, and just one other thing I think about when I think about, energy justice and environmental justice, uh, both the health impacts fall disproportionately on communities of color and low income communities, but so do the costs of energy. Just the simple utility bills are a much bigger part of their daily household budget than it is for someone who makes more money. And so clean energy is now extremely competitive economically, and it can save utilities money and it can save consumers money. And so a shift to clean energy really can help low income folks and help alleviate that energy burden, that cost of energy that they have to pay.
That's so true, Heather. I think I just saw some research came out yesterday that low income households spend on average 15% of their income on their energy bill, and higher income households spend 5% of their total income on their energy bill. And I think there's just a lot more that we can be doing. And Carrie, I think that budget item you talked about is a really good first start.
Well, to loop back to, the commission approved 478 megawatts of solar, partially too based on the economics, to Matt and Heather's points, right? The commission is charged with ensuring the energy is reliable, safe, affordable, and in the public interest. So that's a key benefit to folks who struggle to make ends meet to make sure that it's affordable and providing the lowest cost energy.
Okay, so there are some good ideas that haven't come to fruition yet, but I want to talk more about some of the top energy ideas that were put out there this year. I'll start with you, Spence. What's your top energy idea of the year?
So we've talked about renewables. Recently, Madison Gas and Electric applied for and received approval from the city of Madison to build a electric vehicle charging hub downtown. We'll manage 6 of them. I believe Tesla's going to manage the other 8 of them. So 16 total. Did I say 8 and 8? So 8, we'll own 8 and Tesla will own 8. But we feel like this will help break down the barriers of EV ownership. We currently have 40 charging stations across the service area, and only 5 of those are fast chargers. But the charging hub will be located in the East Washington corridor, and we're seeing that as we put these chargers in, apartment buildings, we currently service about 25 in our service territory. That once these charging hubs and chargers go into buildings, you start seeing more EVs in the apartments, because if there's no charging infrastructure, no one's going to be buying electric vehicles. And as a utility, we're working to clean the grid and reduce carbon emissions. I think the next step is to clean the transportation sector, and as a utility we can help manage fleets, we can help manage charging, and we're just happy to offer that to folks as they're traveling downtown. It's for residents, it's for fleet managers, it's for ride sharing services, but if there's nowhere to charge, you're not going to see EVs popping up across the country.
I'm very excited about that one, Spence, and I'm planning on being a future user of the charging hub. I will even volunteer to be your first charge if you let me.
I mean, personally, you keep hearing about people. It's like, well, is my next car going to be an electric vehicle? And once the infrastructure is there, there's no reason for it not to be. But, right now, it's like a chicken and the egg. What's got to come first? So I think once the charging infrastructure is there, you'll start seeing more and more cars. I mean, in our service territory, I think across the country, 40% of the cars are Teslas anyway. So it's nice to see that, there's a partnership with Tesla and MGE to offer this to folks.
Okay, other top energy ideas.
I think it's microgrids for me. I think Wisconsin is actually making a lot of progress on microgrids, and I think that as we face more and more extreme weather events, whether it's heat or flood or extreme cold, it's really important, a snowstorm that knocks out some power lines for a couple days, it's going to be really important to have more and more microgrids in the system that can provide resilience and emergency capacity and support for communities. And, you know, the Blue Bowls Nature Preserve in Appleton has this amazing state-of-the-art microgrid that's definitely worth touring, with a bunch of different sources of energy and different types of energy storage. But, you know, the Bad River Tribe is building a huge microgrid as well. And I think we're going to see more and more of those come up in Wisconsin. It'll be interesting to see how those emerge, but I think they're really valuable and exciting.
I was just going to add Xcel. Xcel just introduced their proposal to do utility-owned microgrids throughout their territory. I think up to like 30 megawatts. Pretty
I
interesting.
actually just printed that out, and the headline was Xcel Energy proposes microgrids to improve reliability for large customers. That was a Chris Hubbuch article from December 11th. So everybody can go look that up if you want to read more.
Well, microgrids clearly is one of them. And I think I would just say that the Climate Change Task Force recommendations came out recently too. Microgrids is a key part of that. And there's just a lot of ideas in there for the energy industry to look at, including other stakeholder-driven processes this year that resulted in some collaboration and ideas with MWork and other folks that resulted in some other great ideas to move forward on issues. It seems a lot of folks one of the big ideas is not talking about issues, stop talking and start moving on them. So that's something that's been new in this year to me.
My top idea is not really a new idea at all, but I feel like this was kind of a year for energy efficiency to kind of come into its own. It's a big part of the Climate Task Force report. It was a key part of the WEDI report, which was the MWorks utility collaboration thing for ways to clean the grid and create jobs and economic development. PSC budget had a modest proposal to double the focus budget, which actually has surprisingly little impact at when you get down to the ratepayer level in terms of the upfront cost. And then we've seen the payback is like $4 savings. So it's not a new idea. I mean, it's like the most old-fashioned idea we have, but I feel like it's getting some recognition this year, and hopefully maybe that'll carry through.
So there were some surprises throughout the year in our energy space. What was everybody's shock of the year? Bad pun intended.
Well, I'll keep it close to home. I guess I'll say a couple of things. First, COVID was a huge surprise. In March, I thought the biggest impact on my life was going to be a new commissioner at the PSC, but boy, was I wrong, having my kids home with me 24/7 virtual school. And thankfully I have a job where I can continue to work from home. But that was a big one that, stands out. Like Chris says, it dominates pretty much any list of all the stories.
No, I remember having conversations with my wife about like, is this a real thing? I was like, nah, we'll be fine. And then it was March 12th and my boss said, hey, let's do a dry run working from home. And Friday the 13th, I didn't go to work and then I just never went back. So it's, like Carrie said, we're lucky that we can work remotely. Obviously, there's a lot of people that can't work remotely and suffer consequences, due to the pandemic. It's just, it's tough.
Yeah, I was figuring that too. So I was going back throughout the year thinking of the thing that really shocked me enough that I had to post about it on Facebook and everything. It was when I was watching the first presidential debate. Okay, I wasn't watching it in real time, but later I was watching. And there was a question on climate change that came up, and both the president, Donald Trump, as well as President-elect Joe Biden said that they supported electric vehicles. And hearing that they both support electric vehicles was probably one of the biggest shocks of the year for me. So I thought I'd throw out that reminder. And now we've seen in President-elect Biden's transition plan, he's calling for 500,000 new electric vehicle charging stations in part of his infrastructure plan. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out in 2021 as well.
I was surprised too, like during the Super Bowl, there were ads for beer that were talking about renewable energy. Like it was just so mainstream to me. I was like, did you just see that ad? Weren't they just talking about making beer with renewable energy? Like that surprised me too. But of course that was before COVID.
Yeah. I thought there were Clydesdales running through wind farms or something like that. that was pretty exciting. Yeah, I would echo that. I think the visibility of clean energy issues generally, and these topics making it into all levels of politics in ways we've never really seen before in the debates. And then also I think the state legislature races actually addressed climate and energy more than I've ever seen before. So I think that was really interesting. People are really starting to focus on it in new ways, which is great. The more public engagement we get on these issues, the better.
Kristen, to your point about President Biden now, he's nominating Jennifer Granholm from Michigan, who is a supporter of EVs, from governor of Michigan. And to have someone in the Department of Energy that understands the issues like her, I think will be beneficial to the industry as a whole. So that's a good thing.
I like that. Staunch support for the automotive industry and staunch support for electric vehicles can go hand in hand.
I for one was not expecting going into this year that we would have two major IOUs, Alliant and WEC, come out with zero carbon goals this year. I mean, I guess it's not as big a surprise with Alliant, given that they had, announced a gigawatt of solar already last year. But certainly did not expect that WEC would be, putting down $2 billion on solar and batteries and wind and closing coal plants or fossil fuel plants. So maybe it shouldn't have been a surprise, but still a little bit.
Chris, us IOUs are definitely happy to work with the governor and the commission on the climate change task force. That was one of their proposals was the, zero carbon by 2050. And we're all happy to work towards that. We had that UW report on climate goals that showed that, our goals are as a company are as ambitious or more ambitious than the IPCC. So happy to see them join. Happy, as a company, we're proud of our goals.
Does that make all of the investor-owned utilities in Wisconsin, Carrie, with a zero carbon goal?
Yeah, it does. And that was one of my top stories of the year right after COVID, that they all have now zero carbon goals by 2050, and most have 2030 goals too.
Okay, so now that we have determined that none of us could have predicted what came in 2020, let's try to predict what's going to happen in 2021. So I want to get your take on what you see coming next year. Chris, I'm going to start with you again.
Okay, so this sounds like a cop-out, but I think I still have to put COVID up at the top of the list. One, it hasn't gone away. I mean, yeah, the vaccines are rolling out, but we all know it's going to be a little while before we're back to like before times. Two, the big looming question, as even when we do, is who's going to pay all these bills? At some point, is it going to be socialized to ratepayers? Is it going to be socialized to taxpayers? Is it going to be passed on to shareholders? Or what? Will there be some other solution for sharing the burden? But I think that's going to be a huge story still in 2021. One other one, just because we already did talk about COVID so much, but that hasn't come up, I think will be interesting, is Point Beach applying for a 20-year extension to that license, which would take that plant out 80 years. And I think it's going to be a really interesting debate, to the extent that there is a public debate over the role that it plays in kind of continuing to get us to that zero carbon electricity. It's a huge source of Wisconsin's energy supply, and an even bigger source of its a carbon-free energy supply. But then there's the whole question of costs, and how that's going to play out. So
Thanks,
those are
Chris.
mine.
Who else wants to jump in?
I'll go ahead. It's a little different topic, but certainly a large one for the commission, and that's broadband. It's a huge part of our work right now. And we have the governor's broadband task force continuing. Clearly the COVID pandemic has highlighted even more the need for broadband for every aspect of life. So we will be working on that very closely with the governor and other stakeholders to try to get access to everyone, and then also affordable access to everyone. It's, again, back to some of these other issues. We've already talked about COVID and some of the equity issues involved with learning, and it gets back to broadband access. So we've got a lot of work to do there, and we'll be spending a lot of time working on that. But as Chris mentioned, of course, COVID and all of the utilities are scheduled, are thinking about coming in for rate cases this year. So that will be, it's going to be interesting. We've got gigs of solar on the docket. There's a lot of construction cases, microgrid proposals. It's going to be really exciting.
You're gonna be busy.
So for my perspective, if you think about the smaller scale renewables, 2021 is the last year of the federal income tax credit for residential. And it's going to be a 22% tax credit, having been ramped down. And that'll be that last year. I think Wisconsin solar installers will be very busy in 2021, which is great and exciting. And I think solar is a great gig if you're looking for a gig because they are very, very busy. And so I can see a lot happening in that realm.
Heather, would you, what would your odds be that Congress would somehow extend that tax credit? Or do you think it's not necessary anymore? The prices come down so far.
I think if Congress did choose to extend it for a couple of years, it would still have a very powerful impact on the market. That being said, there is so much momentum in the market that despite Focus on Energy having to reduce their rebate significantly from $1,500 to now $500 for residential, projects are still flying off the shelves. I wouldn't put money on Congress extending the tax credit. I'll put it that way. But I could see if they could get, when all the new electeds are in office, I could see a new package in the near term, like maybe in the middle of 2021, where they really consider extending the tax credits at the federal. But I wouldn't put more than $10 wager on it.
I think for me as a government relations manager, when is the capital going to get back open? How is the state budget going to look with, obviously there's requests made by the commission, and working with the new Senate Utility Chair, who's a freshman legislator. Obviously there's the utility issues is like drinking from the fire hose if you don't have any background in it. So, educating him on the issues, and then hopefully in the State House, as we move, further and further into economic viability of solar, that we look at this as a dollar and cents issue and not, strictly as an environmental issue. I think that you'll get more and more conservatives in the legislature to buy into it. And I think in the end, it's good for the ratepayers of Wisconsin too. So,
as I'm thinking ahead to 2021, a couple things I see on the horizon is definitely a continued dialogue on energy justice issues. I think in the second half of 2020, we all started talking about it so much more, and these issues have just really coincided with the pandemic. And I think we're all realizing how important it is to keep that dialogue up. I hope to see a renewed focus on building sector and transportation sector emissions. We've talked so much about the utilities transition to renewable energy, their transition to getting to zero carbon. And as we look at buildings and the transportation sector, I hope that dialogue carries over there. And I think we talked about that. It looks like we'll be seeing that from the Biden administration.
Well, Kristen, just to piggyback on your last comment, the state commercial building council just kicked off a rulemaking process to update building codes, which has been, a huge thing in Wisconsin, and one that's kind of dinged us in some of the ratings, the ACEEE's ratings. So, we'll see. And that's more, that goes beyond 2021. It's a couple year process, but there could be some dialogue on improving those.
I think
standards.
so too. I think that's a really important place to start. And it sounds like they're starting with commercial building codes and then moving on to residential potentially in the next year. So stay tuned for more on that. Maybe in 2021, the Electric Wire podcast can delve into some of those issues a little bit more as well. We did hold the webinar in October of 2020 that I thought was amazingly helpful. It's still on Slipstream's website if anybody wants to get a sort of a 101. And now for our final question and a segment we like to call All the Power, where we ask guests to share what they would do if they ruled the energy world. So now for our last question. If you had all the power in 2021, what would you do with it? And let's start off with Heather.
If I had all the power, which I would be eager to have, so whoever can provide that, please go ahead. If I had the power, the first thing that I would do would be to expand access to community solar in Wisconsin. It's emerging, and our neighbors are doing it really well, and some of our utilities have already got projects up and running, but there's a number of Wisconsinites who don't have access to community solar. They can't put solar on the rooftop, and they can't afford the upfront costs for solar in many cases. So community solar is a great way to reach all of Wisconsin and help provide universal access to clean, renewable, emission-free electricity. And so I want to see us really harness that energy in the state and get strong programs all across the state to provide access to everyone.
Yeah, I'd second that for sure. I mean, you only have to look across the border to Minnesota, where there are over 700 megawatts of installed community solar. And that's a policy decision that their legislature made, that that Xcel has to connect those. But clearly there's an appetite. If you make it available, they will build it.
Thanks, Chris. Did you have anything else you wanted to do with all the power, Chris?
Yeah, I would make a decision on third-party solar, because nobody else wants to make it, unless that some judge can be, maybe I probably will end up being the Supreme Court will be the final, where the buck finally stops. But if you want to give me all that power, I'll make a decision.
All right, done.
I'll bring it back to our favorite topic, COVID. I'm hoping that we all have vaccines and herd immunity by the time we're watching fireworks and fireflies in the yard this summer, if not much sooner than that. So that would be my all the power.
And for me, obviously, 2020 was weird, but it was also a successful year for the company. And, our regulators have been really fair to us. And we can only reach our goals, our 2050 goals, working at a rapid pace. So I think, we're happy to provide whatever technology and whatever infrastructure our customers want to see, and moving as fast as we possibly can through the regulated process is important to us. You're not going to see any coal-fired plants and natural gas facilities in the near future. At least that's not what we're hearing. So the solar infrastructure and the solar generation in this state will continue to grow. And as a utility, we're happy to provide that. So that's 2021 looking at you.
Thanks, Spence. Truly, if I had all the power, I think I would just work to make sure that people understand how important energy is to their daily life. I think as we've gone through the pandemic so far, it's just been incredibly helpful to be able to work from home. The lights are turning on, the house is staying warm. It's been a seamless experience energy-wise, and I really do think that there's so much going on. It's okay. Our colleague Jennifer Schilling always uses this analogy, like a duck floating on the water. You see this graceful duck floating, but underneath it's kicking, kicking, kicking. I'm continually in awe of this industry and how effective and reliable our utilities and utility workers have been. I'm blessed because that's part of what I get to do is we hold educational events. We host this podcast, which helps inform people. So I hope that we get to keep doing that and just sort of amplifying these issues for people.
Kristen, I think that's a great point. And just to add on to what you're saying, I think people don't realize how much goes on at the utilities every day and how critical those workers are. And they've been showing up every single day in the pandemic for work. And they've done a great job. We don't even have to think about it. We turn the light on, flip the switch, the light comes on. So we owe a lot to the utility workers who keep coming to work every day too.
That is so true. And to all of the essential workers, the healthcare workers, and everybody who has been out there day in and day out during the pandemic, we're sending a huge thank you. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining today. I really appreciated having you. I thought this was a really fun way to sum up 2020.
Yeah, thanks for doing this.
Kristen.
This was fun.
Yeah. Happy New Year.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And thank you again to Carrie Templeton, Heather Allen, Chris Hubbuch, and Matt Spencer for joining me today for this roundtable. And I also want to say a special thank you to the members of the Customers First Coalition for sponsoring our organization and our podcast. Our members are the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin, Dairyland Power Cooperative, the IBEW 2150, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, Renew Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Electric Cooperative Association, and WPPI Energy. Remember to subscribe to the Electric Wire wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. Also, you could rate the podcast and leave us a review. Also, you can follow along on Twitter at The Electric Wire. Happy New Year to all of you, and we'll be back in January of 2021.